Hey everyone, tonight we're diving into the odd and sometimes absurd final moments of those who were expected to be the most dignified figures alive. Royalty, emperors, monarchs. Their existence was steeped in ceremony, authority, and lavish robes, but their deaths, let's just say some would prefer to fade into obscurity. Before we begin, if you enjoy what I do here, please like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. It's always gripping to see our global audience. Now, dim the lights or turn on a fan for a quiet hum, and let's settle into tonight's tales. King Adolf Frederick of Sweden. Death by desert. Monarchs often depart in battle, betrayal, or quietly in bed among mourners. But in February 1771, King Adolf Frederick chose a desert-driven demise. After a day of royal duties, or the lack thereof, he indulged in a feast starting with lobster, caviar, sauerkraut, smoked herring, and several glasses of champagne. Nothing fatal, until 14 servings of semla arrived. For those unfamiliar, semla is a sweet wheat roll flavored with cardamom and almond paste, topped with cream and served in warm milk. Rich and heavy, one is indulgent enough. He had 14, far. Beyond indulgence, it was a sugar-based fatality. Servants likely urged a walk after dozen 3, but he stayed, spoon in hand, cream-smeared lips. Later that night, abdominal pain struck, he collapsed, and died of digestive issues. He famously ate himself into oblivion. His reign was calm and mildly reformative, but his epitaph remains, "The king who ate himself to death. Better a sugar. Apocalypse than assassination or plague or poisoned goblet. It's oddly majestic." Next time you eye a second dessert, remember Adolf Frederick and maybe pause King George II of Great Britain. The royal exit isn't normally on the toilet. Yet on October 25th, 1760, that's precisely what happened. In his late 70s, George, who awoke feeling off, followed his usual morning routines, then went to the privy. He never returned. Servants found him collapsed over the chamber pot, felled instantly by an aortic aneurysm. Yes, natural causes, but the location is brutally unforgiving. Imagine the defender of the faith, Elector of Hanover, dying half-sitting on royal porcelain. The chamber pot was likely fine china, maybe gold-rimmed, and attendants kept a neutral face. But court gossip outed the truth. History remembers George II chiefly for this undignified moment, a reminder that even emperors can have mundane ends. Sigurd the Mighty. Some royal demises are tragic or absurd, but this Viking's death defies both logic and biology. A 9th-century Norse warlord, Sigurd conquered the northern British Isles. After killing rival chieftain Bricte, he tied the severed head to his saddle. A Viking trophy, but Bricte's jaw still had teeth. On the bumpy ride home, one snagged Sigurd's leg, leaving a minor wound. No antibiotics. The wound got infected. That scratch from a dead mouth killed him. Picture the mighty Viking felled not in battle, but by a corpse's tooth. A cosmic irony. Historians aren't sure how his men reacted, laughed, wept, or simply untied the head. Sigurd's legacy lives on, as the Viking overcome by dental hygiene, Crown Prince Sado of Korea. Some royal passings are comical. Others make you slowly place down your chopsticks. Mid-18th century, Crown Prince Sado of the Joseon dynasty was mentally unstable. Violent outbursts, servant executions, palace night sword rants. His father, King Yongjo, known for order and appearances, couldn't execute his son, too messy spiritually and politically, nor let him remain free. So he devised a cruel solution. Lock Sado in a large wooden rice chest. No ventilation, no water, no mercy. It was mid-July in Korea. Prince Sado endured 8 agonizing days before dying. No scandalous blade, just silent suffocation in wood. Records say he died by divine judgment, poetic but transparently wood-boxed to death. Ironically, his own son, Zhongzhou, became a celebrated ruler. The family never mentioned it, but historians never forgot. It's a chilling tale of palace politics, mental illness, cruelty, and silence. King Martin of Aragon heard that laughter is good medicine, not for everyone. In 1410, King Martin of Aragon, at the end of his reign, faced digestive issues, excessive flatulence and indigestion. He summoned his jester for relief. The jester told a joke. On being asked why he arrived late, he replied that he saw a young deer hanging from a fig tree and pondered whether it was divine punishment. Martin laughed, then couldn't stop. He collapsed, clutching his stomach, gasping. The official cause: indigestion and uncontrollable laughter. He literally laughed himself to death. Monarchs are supposed to die heroically, or at least dramatically. Instead, Martin expired mid-laugh at a deer and fig tree joke. His death triggered a succession crisis for Aragon's crown, but no one could discuss it without a grim chuckle. It's proof humor can kill Emperor Qin Shi Huang, the man who feared death more than anything, the first emperor of unified China in the 3rd century BCE. He standardized currency, writing, orders, built roads, walls, arms, commissioned the famed terracotta army. Obsessed with immortality, he ordered court alchemists to produce an elixir, mercury pills. Every day he ingested these toxic capsules, believing they were the path to eternal life. Instead, his health declined. Paranoia, erratic court absences. On a journey to find more magical ingredients, he collapsed and presumably died of mercury poisoning. His death was hidden. The court masked the stench of his decomposing body with rotting fish on his entourage's wagon. Mortal irony. He feared death carried rotting flesh and yet remained sealed in an unopened tomb, possibly surrounded by liquid mercury. He lives on as a legend and a dire warning against quack remedies. Pope John XIV. The papacy has seen upheaval, but few reached the chaotic notoriety of John XIV. Born Octavian, he became pope in 955 AD, aged 18, not exactly seasoned. Known for scandal more than sermons, his palace resembled a Roman frat house. He gambled, drank, ordained a 10-year-old bishop, blessed men's mistresses, even toasted the devil during Mass. His death, said to be from a stroke, but it happened in bed with a married woman. A pope dying mid-affair? That's not scandal, it's a moral void. The Vatican never officially confirmed this. Monks wrote statements and silence was safer than embarrassment. But the rumor endured. Historians debate whether it's truth or smear, but centuries later, we still recall Pope John V for that scandalous end. That's tonight's whirlwind tour of royal demises, bizarre, brutal, or bittersweet. No pageantry, just the human and occasionally absurd side of power. But let's imagine just for a moment that it's all true. Picture the priest tasked with this eulogy. Here lies Pope John VII, 12th shepherd of the faithful, Christ's vicar, and frequent visitor of marital bedrooms. His death marked the end of one of the most scandalously unpapal papacies in history. Though he reigned less than 10 years, he blurred every line between sacred and profane. Pope John V earns his place on this list, not only for how he died, but how spectacularly he ignored his sacred duties. He arrived, he sinned, he collapsed, and history never forgot. King Alexander of Greece. Monkey business, royal life often involves war, plots and poison, but King Alexander of Greece met his end thanks to a monkey. In 1920, Greece teetered on political chaos. Alexander, a young placeholder king during his father's exile, was strolling his palace grounds with his dog. Suddenly, a macaque, clever but irritable, owned by a staffer, attacked. When Alexander intervened, a second monkey appeared, biting his leg repeatedly. The wounds seemed minor at first and were treated, yet days later they festered into gangrene and sepsis. Within 3 weeks, the king was dead. His death sparked a constitutional crisis, invited his father's return, and deepened Greece's instability. Headlines fudged the details: an unfortunate injury or sudden illness. But truth cannot be concealed. Alexander's reign was forgettable, but his death became unforgettable. He wore a crown, yet fell to 2 nameless primates, earning the title of one of royal history's oddest trivia answers: King Charles II of Navarre, death by candle. When thinking of royal deaths, one might picture swords or poison. But King Charles II of Navarre, known as Charles the Bad, ended in a far more absurd and flammable way. In the late 14th century, he was gravely ill. Medieval doctors prescribed a brandy-soaked linen wrap from head to toe to warm him and cure the sickness. A servant sewed him into this linen cocoon and went to snip the stitches by candlelight. As historians recount with horror and dark amusement, the flame touched the alcohol-soaked wrap, and the king erupted into flames. Panic ensued, nobles fainted, attendants screamed. By the time they quelled the blaze, it was too late. Charles II, the plotting and scheming monarch, died unceremoniously barbecued by his own nurse's inefficient care. The irony: a man who schemed others' downfalls was undone by a fiery misstep. Lesson learned: never mix royal treatments and open flame, especially if you're already dubbed the Bad. King Edmund II, death on the privy. Some royal deaths are dramatic, others symbolic. And then there's King Edmund II of England, who allegedly died in the most vulnerable position imaginable, on the toilet. Known as Edmund Ironside, he fought off Danish invaders fiercely, but his 7-month reign in 1016 ended in a bizarre assassination tale. Medieval rumor recounts that a would-be assassin, knowing the king's habits, hid beneath the wooden seat and stabbed him from below. Gruesome. Definitely. Dignified, not at all. Official records remain unclear. Some say battle wounds, others mention treachery. But a few chroniclers offer a vivid scene: a dagger thrust upward while Edmund sat in private. Political slander or a twisted truth, the story stuck. The image of a warrior king felled on the privy endures as a cautionary tavern tale. Even the mightiest can fall in their weakest moments. King Henry the Too many eels among fatal royal indulgences. King Henry I of England may win the prize for one of the strangest. In 1135, after surviving wars and rebellion during a 35-year reign, he was undone by a plate of lampreys, jawless eel-like fish, a delicacy of their time. Despite repeated warnings from his court physicians, heavy on digestion, light on survivability, Henry indulged. While visiting Normandy, he devoured far too many lampreys, then fell violently ill. Abdominal pain, vomiting, fever, the full royal digestive collapse. He died days later from food poisoning. Embalmed and sent back to England in winter, his remains endured poorly in 12th century preservation. A capable, ruthless ruler, Henry's legacy was overshadowed by one grotesque meal. When warned, he famously replied, "I'd rather die than give up lampreys." Mission accomplished. King James II of Scotland, blown up by cannon kings, have died in battle or illness, but King James II of Scotland was killed by his own cannon. In 1460, at 29, he was besieging Roxburgh Castle, a stronghold held by the English. Passionate about artillery, James desired a front-row position when firing his new cannon. Unfortunately, the device exploded, tearing through his thigh, severing his leg, and by some reports injuring part of his torso. He died almost instantly from the blast. His shocked attendants fled, though the army recovered and eventually captured the castle, renaming it James's Castle. The king's death remains a dramatic technology failure. He championed artillery modernization, yet failed to maintain a basic safety distance. Today, James II is remembered less for his politics and more as one of the few monarchs literally blown up by his own enthusiasm, Emperor Elagabalus. Too weird to live. If Rome needed a cautionary figure for unchecked excess, it would be Emperor Elagabalus. Born Varius Avitus Bassianus, he became emperor in 2-18 AD at just 14. With immense power and no restraint, he flouted norms. He appointed his horse to public office, demanded to be called empress, and organized feasts where he showered guests. With so many rose petals, they suffocated. His marriages, 5 in total, including one to a Vestal virgin, broke taboos. He wore women's clothes, makeup, and sought money for a surgical sex change. Modern interpretations might describe him as gender non-conforming, but to Romans he was scandal incarnate. His religious reforms, replacing Jupiter with the Syrian sun god Elagabal, outraged elites. Once he had senators forced to dance before a sacred black stone. In 222 AD, the Praetorian Guard snapped, assassinating him and his mother. There, bodies were dragged through the streets and dumped in the Tiber. Elagabalus's reign serves as a reminder that unbridled power and eccentric extremes can lead to a violent end. And the Roman Empire effectively pressed reset. Elagabalus was just 18 when he died, a teenager granted immense power, surrounded by endless parties, yet lacking self-restraint. Historians still argue whether he was a visionary misunderstood, or simply chaos personified in silk. But one thing stands: his reign was bizarre, unruly, and utterly overwhelming for Rome. Catherine the Great, her reputation endures like few rulers. A renowned reformer, patron of the arts, expansionist monarch, and Voltaire correspondent. Yet at dinner parties, her name often draws one whispered question: thoughts on her and a horse. Let's set the record straight. She did not die in some scandal with a stallion. That lurid myth, absurd and false, was concocted by enemies posthumously. There is no historical evidence. It reveals more about 18th century gossip than Catherine. In truth, she passed away from a stroke in 1796 at age 67 in her private quarters with no drama involved. She collapsed, never regained consciousness. Simple, quiet, human, so why the rumor? Catherine's rule made powerful foes both at home and abroad. She was a lone female ruler in a male-dominated world, unapologetically intelligent and known for her personal relationships. True, she had lovers, but so did many kings. What set her apart was that her affairs were known, documented, scandalized, while her male peers were celebrated. After her death, her adversaries seized the chance to tarnish her memory. That log horse rumor, vulgar, obscene, was perfect for lasting humiliation. It endured not because it made sense, but because it shocked. It's the ancient equivalent of a tabloid headline that refuses to fade. Yet Catherine's real achievements, expanding territory, modernizing government, steering Russia into the Enlightenment, still pale in public memory compared to one baseless, humiliating anecdote. Ultimately, she didn't die dramatically, didn't die in battle. She died quietly and privately, though history wouldn't let her go with grace. The lesson? Power is temporary, but rumors, especially involving horses, can outlast empires. Emperor Valentinian II, the bathtub death. No one knows why. Most royal deaths have an explanation: a battle, disease, a choking eel. But Valentinian II's death remains an unsolved enigma, floating literally for over 600 years. Let's rewind to 392 AD. He was just 21, though technically emperor since age 4, because nothing says qualified like being in diapers. As with most child emperors, someone else held the reins. That was General Arbogast. He wasn't discreet, using the young Valentinian as a puppet. The young emperor, tired of being a figurehead, began to push back. Tensions mounted. Political. Murmurings turned threatening, and then one morning Valentinian was discovered dead in his bath, not during a feast, not stabbed in the Senate, just floating silently like a misplaced chapter in a bad mystery novel. No bruises, no blood, just a lifeless emperor. Arbogast claimed it was suicide, neat and convenient, but most historians doubt it. Valentinian was enthusiastic, just finding his voice. Suicide seems unlikely. Political assassination fits better. But with no witnesses and no forensics beyond he's not breathing, the true cause remains unknown. What followed was worse. The Western Roman Empire spiraled into chaos. Arbogast installed another figurehead and civil war erupted, all from a corpse in a bath and 1,000 unanswered questions. It may not be the most gruesome royal death or the most absurd, but it's the quietest with the loudest implications. History teaches, when emperors sink in bathtubs, someone's likely to have helped. In sunlit Argos, among marble temples and olive-scented air, a delicate girl named Telesilla was born into aristocracy. Her family was wealthy and educated, yet she was a frail, sickly child, expected to fade quietly behind courtyard walls. From early on, she battled chronic illness. Ancient records don't specify the ailment, but she was often bedridden, an observer of life from behind sheer curtains. In a society valuing athleticism and public presence, especially in men, her physical weakness could have consigned her to insignificance, but fate, or the muses, intervened. Unable to join public life, she turned inward, discovering poetry. Lines and rhythms became her companions. Instead of despair, she composed. Her poems honored Apollo, Artemis, Athena, deities of healing, strategy, and war. It was almost ironic, given what came next. And as her devotion deepened, something remarkable happened. Pausanias, an ancient travel writer, claimed that through her artistic discipline and dedication to the muses, Telesilla gradually regained strength. Perhaps she engaged in ritual purification, or simply found purpose that rejuvenated her spirit. Whatever the cause, she emerged not just healed, but renewed, strong, eloquent. Her work gained admiration. Her name traveled from symposium to symposium. Her lyrics resonated in the hearts of Argive women. Telesilla wasn't writing verses, she was forging identity. She gave her city a renewed voice. No one anticipated that voice would soon resonate, not in theaters, but on battlefields. As her reputation grew, her home became a site of reverence, not for wealth or beauty, but for her words. She wrote under divine inspiration, Apollo and Artemis. These weren't mere hymns, they were spiritual summons, calls to inner arms. Her verses likely echoed in temples and festivals, sung by choruses of young women robed in white beneath sunlit colonnades. Through her poetry, Telesilla offered spiritual expression and emotional education. She reminded Argives, especially its women, that they too were part of a larger divine narrative. They were not spectators in a male-led myth. They were threads in the tapestry. While men debated in the agora, her verse seeped into their daughters, and, in a society where education for women was rare, poetry became their inheritance. Her hymns taught reverence, strength, even metaphorical defiance, but for Telesilla they were also medicine. Ancient accounts suggest her rigorous poetic work helped cure her illness. Though modern readers may be skeptical of writing to heal, the concept remains timeless. She found purpose, resilience, and identity. With each poem, she stood taller, and Argos listened. The city, which had grown comfortable and reliant on past glories, was about to face Sparta again. Its neighbor had already flexed its might. While Argive men debated, nobody expected the once sickly poet to become their catalyst for resistance. By around 494 BCE, tensions with Sparta reached boiling point. The Battle of Sepheia erupted, trap set by King Cleomenes of Sparta, Argive forces, confident and tied to tradition, walked into ambush. It was brutal and surgical. Hundreds of Argive soldiers were slaughtered. Some say the male fighting force was nearly wiped out. Argos lay defenseless, gates open, warriors dead, future bleak. But Sparta miscalculated. Behind those bloodied walls stood Telesilla. Amid mourning and despair, she stepped forward, not with a spear, but with fierce determination. She rallied the women, mothers, daughters, widows, and she armed them, using every weapon in reach, spears from battlements, shields left behind, even stones and farming tools reinvented as arms, and they trained the elderly, the young, even servants. Under Telesilla's direction, it wasn't mythic fantasy, it was strategy. She positioned women on battlements to project strength. She drilled them in formation. They were not soldiers, but they were relentless, resolute, and enraged. The city waited, breath held. Spartans were expected to return, certain Argos would collapse. But when they came, they found not a shattered city, but a wall of armed women, prepared and steadfast, led by a poet. With no crown, no title, just commanding in her voice, Argos had fallen, but now it would rise. The Spartan army marched back, expecting easy spoils. They believed the men of Argos were broken, and their citizens equally so. Conquest and Spartan. Mercy, probably. But at Argos's gates they found no submission. Instead they witnessed defiance, a spectacle. The walls bristled with women armed and resolute, their gazes unwavering, their posture unbreakable. Their commander, once known only for her poetry, now stood tall, orchestrating defense with the precision of a seasoned general. Then they struck. This battle was far from the polished ideal of shield walls and striking bronze. It was raw chaos, fierce, unyielding, intensely personal. Women hurled spears from ramparts. Boiling oil scorched Spartan helmets. Stones rained down like curses. It was psychological as much as physical. Spartans, trained for formal warfare, suddenly found themselves in close quarters combat against women, combatants they'd hesitate to kill. That hesitation proved costly. Centuries later, Pausanias recorded that under Telesilla's leadership, the Argive women forced the Spartans into retreat. Unlikely? Perhaps, but context matters. Sparta had already crushed Argos's male army. What remained now was resistance powerful enough to threaten Spartan invincibility. To lose men to a militia led by women wasn't just dangerous, it was humiliating. And in Sparta, humiliation was worse than death, so they withdrew. Let that sink in. Teles, a poet untrained in battle, rallied a band of grieving, enraged, determined women, and saved their city. Not myth, not legend, but human history. This was more than military victory. It was symbolic. It transformed Argos's story. It redefined women's roles in the face of ruin. And it exposed an unexpected truth to Sparta. Courage doesn't need a beard, and leadership isn't only forged on the battlefield. That day, Argos didn't fall. It stood taller, upheld by hands once entrusted only with lyres, guided by Telesilla's iron will. Victory tasted peculiar. Argos had survived, but it was forever changed. Its streets echoed with mourning, its temples stained with the blood of lost husbands, brothers, sons. But amid that grief rose a new legacy, crafted by women's hands and Telesilla's unwavering resolve. She didn't seize power or claim a crown. Instead, she returned to her poetry. It seems anticlimactic, but that was her brilliance. She fought not for glory, but for necessity. When Argos was safe, she went back to composing hymns and honoring the gods. But now her verses carried weight, not mere festival lyrics, but memory set in meter. Imagine Argive girls growing up with whispers of the poet general who led their mothers into battle, their voices reciting her lines beneath moonlight, not ritual, but power. Telesilla's poetry became prophecy. Prophecy became tradition. Argos honored her not just in song, but in stone. At the temple of Aphrodite stood a statue of Telesilla. Seated, scrolls at her feet, one arm on her lyre, the other on her shield. A declaration. She was both artist and warrior. Those roles were not contradictory. They were essential. Across Greece, her story spread. Telesilla became a symbol of resilience and feminine courage in a world that rarely embraced it. Philosophers debated her, poets wove her themes, and she found her place among heroic women. But perhaps most powerful was the quiet after. It emphasized her nature. She didn't hunt war or cultivate chaos. Her defense of Argos sprang from necessity, not ambition. When peace returned, she returned to ink, meter, and that sacred space where poems thrive. And in doing so, she showed that true strength isn't judged by how long you wield a sword, but by knowing when to lay it down. Her name traveled beyond Argos, carried not by armies, but by admirers. Her tale, part history, part legend, echoed in symposiums, scrolls, and soft-spoken admiration by men, shocked to speak of a woman as poet and protector. She wasn't myth, remained human, and that made her story all the more compelling. Her dual legacy resonated across the Greek world, shattering expectations. In an era when women were meant to be silent or ornamental, Telesilla was none of those. She was educated, expressive, and when needed, fierce. Her poetry survived, fragmentary but vivid, passages of reverence, ritual, spiritual depth. She didn't just write. She shaped sacred spaces. How much of her work is lost? We can't know. Like many women in antiquity, her voice remains in fragments, filtered through male scribes centuries later. But those remnants speak volumes. Beauty, community, purpose, the power of words to forge courage and memory. Artists depicted her with scrolls and shields, sometimes crowned, sometimes contemplative, always poised between art and action. She inspired later women with a steady flame that never fully extinguishes. Through the Hellenistic and early Roman eras, she appeared in anthologies, rare beside male voices. Her story repeated not for novelty, but because it mattered. Tales of Argos wasn't the loudest warrior or the most prolific poet. She was something rarer, a woman who walked both worlds with grace, fire, and intent, and forced the world to pay attention with clarity, not conquest. As centuries passed, her name faded not from legend, but from mainstream history. Like many ancient women, she was sidelined, footnoted, fragmented, presented with polite surprise, as though it were accidental that a woman achieved so much. The fluid dynamics of the Hellenistic period favored conquerors, philosophers, kings. A woman poet who commanded a militia didn't fit empire tales. By the time Roman writers mentioned her, she was almost folkloric. Plutarch noting her with bewildered interest, less in her verse or politics, more that a woman commanded at all. She was an anomaly, but history betrays us. Telesilla wasn't unique. She was one among many female leaders, thinkers, poets whose stories were deemed inconvenient for full preservation. Scrolls vanished, statues repurposed, voices suppressed, not by violence, but by centuries of neglect. Yet Telesilla persisted. Her story survived not because it was allowed, but because it was too compelling to erase. The image of a woman on the walls, shield in one hand, verse in the other, refused. Oblivion, that image smolders, reignites in crisis, reminds each generation that bravery wears many faces, and some wear veils. In modern times, historians and feminists are reclaiming her legacy, not to inflate it, but to restore it, to unearth the silence, and let her story stand beside male histories. By doing so, we don't just remember Telesilla, we remember what history tried to erase. Though Greek stones have worn and scrolls turned to dust, Telesilla's legacy lingers in three forms: stone, scroll, and sisterhood. First, stone. In Argos's sanctuary of Aphrodite, long after war's echoes faded, her statue stood, not a grand colossus, but a quiet monument. Seated calmly, scrolls at her feet, hand on helmet, no raised sword, no heroic pose. A moment of stillness, an image of art and action merged, its placement in Aphrodite's temple, goddess of love, beauty. Resilience was deliberate, then the scrolls. Though most of her poetry is gone, what remains reveals a lyric voice, intimate, melodic, spiritually devoted. Scholars have pieced together verses with emotional depth. She wrote not for spectacle, but for the soul. Perhaps that's why those lines outlived her battles. Finally, sisterhood. Her story became a coded anthem for women denied swords or recognition. She offered something enduring, permission to act, speak, lead, protect. She became a mirror for generations, showing their potential no matter how blurred by time. Her tale inspired plays, poems, academic studies. In feminist readings, she's not a footnote, she's a cornerstone, a reminder that even when institutions close doors, individuals can still speak, and when history blinds us, memory opens windows. In classrooms, books, whispered conversations, Telesilla lives. She's the patron of the underestimated, the poet who chose not just to sing of heroes, but to become one. She sought no monument. She didn't clamor for her name in records. Yet here we are, over 2 millennia later, still speaking her name, still telling her story, still moved by her actions in a world determined to forget women like her. What makes her legacy compelling isn't simply that she fought or wrote, but that she did both when neither was expected, when neither was permitted. A sickly girl with a lyre wasn't supposed to lead. A hymn writer wasn't meant to save a city's fate, but she did, not by divine favor or noble birth, but through clarity, purpose, and grit. In Greece's grand narrative, filled with bronze heroes and clever schemers, Telesilla stands apart. She doesn't roar like Achilles or plot like Odysseus. She does something more difficult. She holds the line, facing collapse without flinching. Not because she was fearless, but because someone had to step forward, and no one else would. That's why her echo still rings. She reminds us heroism doesn't depend on trumpets or laurels. Sometimes it's a woman who picks up a sword with trembling hands, steadies herself and says, "Not today." Alike continue to draw inspiration from her. Her story is included in feminist studies, referenced when discussing women in warfare, and even cited in debates about the fluidity of roles across gender and class. She's become not just a symbol of Argos, but a symbol of resistance itself. If you listen closely, you can still hear her voice beneath today's stories, echoing in every woman who steps forward when others step aside, in every creator who refuses to stay confined, in every act of courage that begins quietly and finishes with impact. Tella's legacy hasn't faded, it lives on, quietly moving through our world. Because the truth is, the liar was never defeated. Instead, she was reshaped into something sharper. Long before architects drafted plans, humans faced a fundamental need, crossing from one side to the other. Spanning rivers, deep ravines, and chasms, early humans wondered, how do we traverse where land vanishes? The first bridges weren't engineered, they were discovered by wanderers and hunters who noticed. Fallen logs over streams or vines hanging across gorges. These crossings weren't crafted, they were found. Nature offered cues and people seized them, a fallen log, a series of stones. This was where bridges began, sprung from curiosity, fear, and necessity. Over time, these accidental crossings were refined. In rainforests, people twisted vines and reeds to create hanging footpaths. Though unstable, they weren't safe at night. They provided vital links between food sources, isolated communities, and civilization. In parts of modern South America, early societies began weaving plant fibers into longer suspended paths. These were more than makeshift ropes. They were reinforced, tested, and perfected over generations. The Incas, long before Spanish arrival, mastered rope bridge building. Even before the Inca Empire, Andean peoples grasped tension, weight distribution, and the potential of natural materials. What's remarkable about these early bridges isn't size, it's boldness. Picture a deep canyon, hundreds of feet down, and instead of turning back, someone starts braiding grass. That's ingenuity intertwined with courage. These initial crossings did more than just link places. They reshaped relationships. When two valleys became connected, the exchange of people and ideas flowed freely. Trade routes emerged, languages blended, cultural dialogue was born on shaky ropes and damp planks. Even the simplest bridge is more than wood and fiber. It's an invitation, a declaration, a quiet defiance of nature's limits. Those first spans marked the beginning of our journey toward connection, and there was no turning back. In the high Andes, where cliffs plunge sharply and rivers surge with glacial melt, the Incas crafted a unique solution to their harsh geography. They didn't just build roads, they wove them across the sky. Their iconic rope bridges, or quishuachaca, defied imagination. Made entirely from grass, no wood, metal, or stone, they relied on ichu, a hardy mountain grass, twisted first into cords, then into cables. The construction was both technical and ceremonial. Entire villages joined annually to build or rebuild these bridges by hand. Each family wove its own section, braiding while chanting, working in a rhythm passed down through generations. The resulting span stretched over a 100-foot canyon, swaying in the mountain winds, held together by tension and trust, no nails or bolts. Yet these bridges supported llamas, soldiers, messengers, and traders. They were arteries of an empire navigating terrain where stone bridges were impossible. Elegant in their simplicity, they mirrored cobwebs suspended across voids, bending with the wind rather than resisting it. When one collapsed, it wasn't failure, it was time for renewal. These bridges were sacred and living. Annual rebuilding. Rituals acknowledged that the land shouldn't be conquered, only collaborated with. Harmony, not force, underpinned their strength, something the Incas understood fully. Today, one rope bridge near Huinay, Peru is still rebuilt annually, honored as intangible cultural heritage by UNESCO. Tourists walk it carefully. Locals tread with practiced ease. In a world forgetting how to repair, the Inca bridge reminds us strength doesn't always lie in stone. Sometimes it grows from woven grass, collective effort, and determination to connect. Meanwhile, in ancient China, a different bridge-building philosophy emerged, one focused on permanence and symmetry. Chinese engineers saw bridges not just as functional, but as harmonious unions of earth, water, and sky. By the Han, Sui, and Tang dynasties, they had developed the segmental arch bridge. Unlike the steep Roman arch, this low arch offered stability under dynamic loads like carts and animals. One outstanding example is the Xiu Bridge, built in the early 7th century by the engineer Li Chun. Spanning 123 feet with a 37-foot arch, it remains one of the world's oldest open spandrel stone bridges. Li Chun added smaller arches at the base to reduce weight and resist floodwaters. His understanding of structural forces was centuries ahead. But Chinese bridges were more than feats of engineering. They were poetic. Often sited near gardens or temples, they reflected Taoist harmony. A bridge was more than a crossing. It was a contemplative pause between places, a chance to reflect on still water below and shifting skies above. Stone lions guarded entrances, symbols of protection. Bridge names spoke of luck, longevity, spiritual awakening. In Tang and Song poetry and painting, bridges became metaphors for change and balance. Crossing one meant more than travel, it meant engaging with harmony itself. If China built with harmony, Rome built with ambition. For the Romans, a bridge was a statement: we are here to last. As the empire expanded, rivers and gorges looked like obstacles. Romans saw blueprints, building on Etruscan arch techniques. They used stone, concrete, and determination to create enduring structures. One of the most famous bridges was built by Pons Fabricius in 62 BCE, still serving foot traffic on the Tiber. Over 2,000 years of use, surviving floods and conflicts, it still stands. Roman arches evenly distributed weight into the ground, allowing larger spans and heavier loads. The invention of hydraulic concrete, able to set underwater, gave Romans unrivaled versatility. But Roman bridges were also grand, facing with marble or limestone, adorned with imperial inscriptions, statues, and triumphal messages. They celebrated conquest. Some doubled as aqueducts, like the Pont du Gard in modern France, a majestic blend of functionality and monumentality. For Roman legions, bridges meant speed; for merchants, prosperity; for the empire, permanence. The straight roads of Rome were famous, but it was the bridges that made them matter. Wherever Rome went, it literally and symbolically bridged conquest and civilization. Even after the empire fell, many Roman bridges remained in use, rebuilt and reimagined. Their stones speak of an era when engineering and empire were inseparable. To cross one is to walk in the footsteps of conquerors, feeling the weight of eternity underfoot. While Rome built in stone and China in balance, ancient India created a unique bridge tradition, living bridges grown from trees. In Meghalaya's wet, hilly northeast, rivers swell during monsoons, wiping out timber and rope bridges. Centuries ago, the Khasi and Jaintia tribes forged a solution: living root bridges. They guided the aerial roots of Ficus elastica across rivers using wooden or bamboo scaffolds. Over years, decades, these roots wove into living bridges, anchored in the soil. These living structures don't rot or splinter, they grow stronger with time. It might take 15 years before one becomes passable, but once mature, it can endure for centuries, supported by the very earth it spans. This architecture wasn't built quickly, it was crafted over generations. There were no blueprints, only tradition, intuition, observation. And they're stunning, suspended in waterfalls and emerald valleys, organic, surreal, mythic. In a world obsessed with speed, these bridges offer a slow and defiant alternative. They show that with time, care, and cooperation with nature, we can create wonders as enduring as stone. They are communal, sacred, natural. Crossing one is entering a different rhythm, a rhythm that listens to the earth instead of reshaping it. In that quiet harmony, India didn't just bridge rivers, it bridged the wild itself. In Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates carved life through desert and city, early civilizations faced the same dilemma. Rivers that nourished must also be crossed. These waterways brought trade, irrigated fields, sustained cities, but they also divided. And wherever boundaries emerge, bridges follow. What they had were simple materials, mud brick timber, and a sharp intellect. Their rivers were wide but shallow. Their materials were fragile, yet their creativity was robust. Babylon, a dazzling city in ancient Mesopotamia, was split by the Euphrates River, but also brought together. Greek historian Herodotus described an early movable bridge in Babylon, built with wooden planks across boats, bound with papyrus ropes. By day it carried people and carts. By night it was taken apart to block invaders. Whether literal or figurative, this story highlights an essential truth. Mesopotamian cities were logistical marvels. Bridges there were more than just structures. They were tactics. Some were low and temporary, meant to be rebuilt after floods. Others were permanent, made of baked bricks, asphalt mortar, and deep foundations anchored in silt and clay. The Mesopotamians knew the river's ways. They didn't try to dominate water, they adapted to it, above it, around it, even beneath it. Trade caravans hauling grain, textiles, lapis lazuli relied on bridges. Pilgrims crossed rivers to reach temples and ziggurats. And monarchs aware of power recognized that whoever controlled the bridge controlled the city. As empires like the Assyrians and Persians rose, bridges grew more sophisticated, stone piers, wooden spans that lasted longer. Yet the roots of that ingenuity lay in simple actions, bundling reeds, piling clay, stretching logs. The concept of why bridge came long before figuring out how. Mesopotamian bridges might not have endured like Roman structures, nor inspired poetry like China's, but they laid infrastructure's cornerstone, the skeleton of civilization. They showed us that commerce demands connection, and that wherever there's water, humans will seek to cross it. For ancient Greeks, the world was not just a backdrop, it was a canvas to sculpt, measure, and perfect. Their bridges embodied the same care they poured into temples and sculptures. They didn't attempt massive spans for empire's sake, like the Romans. Instead, they crafted modest yet intelligent bridges over streams, marshes, rocky gullies, marrying form and function. Consider the Ardico Bridge in the Peloponnese, built in the Bronze Age around 1300 BCE. Made of unmortared limestone boulders, it still carries foot traffic today. No inscriptions, no imperial symbols, just a graceful, precise arch. The Greeks understood stone, load-bearing, and the value of community links. Their early roads and bridges often led pilgrims to sacred sites like Delphi or Olympia, structures built not merely for transport but to shepherd people toward the divine. Later, in classical and Hellenistic times, Greek builders borrowed Etruscan and Eastern techniques, using timber and stone together, installing drainage, grading paths, and even adding guardrails. Yet, aesthetics mattered. Greek bridges sought harmony in the landscape, aligning symmetrically with hills and sky, stone overhead, air above, water below. In Greek thought, bridges were metaphors, crossings between cities, gods and mortals, chaos and order. So while their spans might be shorter than Roman aqueducts, Greek bridges stand as quiet achievements, strong, serene, thoughtful, not thundering. In Egypt, the Nile was less obstacle, more highway. Boats served as bridges. But for land crossings, Egyptians applied intention and symbolism. Along the Nile's fertile banks, they built irrigation canals and small-scale bridges, flat stone causeways, wooden crossings, simple canal bridges, all functional. At Deir el-Medina, archaeologists uncovered narrow stone paths over irrigation ditches, purposeful and precisely leveled. And then there were the great causeways at Giza, long stone ramps that linked the Nile to the pyramids. Not bridges per se, but ceremonial passageways to transport goods, chariots, and mummified pharaohs during rituals. These causeways symbolize spiritual journeys, from life to death, mortal to divine. As Egypt urbanized, more bridges emerged over canals, near temples and granaries, some wooden, now lost, others stone foundations buried beneath desert sands. Egyptian bridges weren't monuments to conquest. They were conduits for water, grain, sacred memory. Humble in form, yet monumental in meaning, eternal transitions from one realm to another. By the medieval era, ancient bridges, root bridges. In India, Roman arches in France, Greek stone spans stood as silent, unbroken witnesses to human ambition, fear, and ingenuity. All these early bridges, whether built with grass, stone, wood, or even imagined, were acts of faith, not always religious, but faith that we could overcome separation, that connections mattered, that distances could be bridged. Each civilization had its method. The Incas used tension, Romans used compression, Chinese relied on curvature, Mesopotamians on buoyancy. But the purpose was consistent: link what nature divided, eliminate distance, and each bridge revealed its builders. The Incas trusted time, the Greeks balance, the Egyptians eternity, the Romans concrete. Beyond engineering and philosophy, bridges carried stories. Rope bridges whispered community, Roman aqueducts roared empire, Chinese stone arches sang harmony. They transmitted beliefs, identities, purpose. Some were urgent creations post-war or flood. Others arose through ritual, rebuilt in ceremony, maintained by farmers and children. None were built alone. Bridges demanded hands, patience, hope. That's why they still speak to us, not for ancient tools or clever math, but for the bravery to connect, to reach out from danger to safety, from isolation to unity, from now to future generations. In a fractured world, ancient bridges remind us connection is worth the work. Strength can be gentle. Sometimes the strongest act is reaching out. Next time you cross an old bridge, pause. You're walking on ancient dreams, still holding steady. Before writing or carved hymns, there was sound. First, instinctive rhythm. Fire crackling, raindrops, rustling leaves, footsteps. Then early humans began imitating, creating instruments. From the Paleolithic, we have bird bone and mammoth ivory flutes from German caves over 40,000 years old, with drilled holes to shape pitch. These weren't toys, they were tools for emotion. Imagine a flickering cave, a carved bone flute echoing lullaby or hunting chant. These early notes were memory and function, not just entertainment. Rhythmic clapping or drumming, synchronized labor, lifted morale, intimidated enemies. Repetition made things memorable, information sung before writing existed. Oral tradition started with music. In tribal rituals worldwide, percussion, wood slats, seed rattles, animal skin drums created communal experiences without words. Music emerged intertwined with spirituality. Early burials contained flutes, drums, bells, companions for the dead or comforters for the living, reflecting grief, hope, or longing. In those sounds, we find expression, memory, celebration, mourning. Before cities, before myths, we sang in Mesopotamia's fertile crescent, the Tigris and Euphrates, carving life from dust. Music was essential. From Sumer to Babylon, temples to taverns, sound shaped identity, order, the divine. Mesopotamians didn't just play, they recorded music. 3rd millennium BCE Sumerian seals show lyres, flutes, drums. Archaeologists found elaborately decorated lyres with gold, lapis lazuli, bullhead motifs, objects for the elite and for the afterlife. The lyre was a sacred instrument, played by temple professionals and street performers at rituals, coronations, banquets, battles. Then came notation. A clay tablet from Ugarit around 1400 BCE inscribes hymns with lyrics and relative pitch instructions, the world's oldest known musical notation. We may never hear it as the ancients did, but its existence shows music's vital role in structure and spirituality. Music tied to cosmology, intervals mirrored celestial harmony, the order of planets and seasons. This idea would later influence Greek philosophy. Whether played by priestesses to Inanna or minstrels in markets, Mesopotamian music was layered, professional, sacred, celebratory, political, a channel between mortals and gods. In a world of mud and mystery, music shaped things unseen, anchoring memory, ritual, time, soul, and story. It echoed through temple courts, drifted past market stalls, and accompanied every stage of life, from birth to burial. In ancient Egypt, music wasn't just decorative, it was vital. Egyptians believed music held magical powers. It could soothe the gods, heal illness, and guide souls into the afterlife. Instruments were viewed as divine gifts. The goddess Hathor, often shown holding a sistrum, a rattle-like instrument used in sacred rituals, symbolized this belief. Shaking the sistrum was believed to awaken life itself. Its sound represented the rhythm of creation. Archaeologists have discovered harps, flutes, lutes, and lyres painted in tombs dating back to Egypt's Old Kingdom around 2500 BCE. These weren't generic instruments. They were meticulously crafted and richly adorned. Harps came in both angular and curved forms, usually played seated on the ground. Their gut strings resonated in religious rites and court performances alike. Music was deeply embedded in ritual life. Hymns were sung at dawn to greet the gods. Priests and priestesses were not only keepers of sacred texts, they were also skilled musicians. Certain tones were thought to align with specific deities or emotional states. There was music for mourning, praise, and purification. Every act had a matching sound, but music wasn't limited to temples and courts. Street musicians, dancers, and folk singers animated the markets of Memphis and Thebes. Percussion instruments like frame drums, clappers, and castanets added rhythm to local festivities. Women often led performances, either as entertainers or as hired mourners who vocalized communal grief at funerals. Egyptian hieroglyphs even included words to describe musical moods. Hes conveyed joy or reverence, while Tu signaled sorrow or mourning. Music wasn't abstract. It was emotional infrastructure. Even in death it played a role. Funerary texts sometimes specified chants and instruments to be used, ensuring that life's final journey was not taken in silence. In Egypt, music served gods, rulers, commoners, and mourners alike, but above all it expressed a timeless truth. Sound was the language of the soul, and even silence carried meaning. In ancient Greece, music was more than just performance. It was mathematics, medicine, philosophy, and divination. It wasn't simply played, it was studied, theorized, and revered. For Greeks, music reflected the cosmos, harmonious, ordered, and sacred. The Greek word musik didn't just mean music. It referred to all the arts inspired by the muses, goddesses of creativity in poetry, dance, and song. Making music was seen as tapping directly into divine inspiration. From Athens' street musicians to Ionia's philosophers, music was both a daily activity and a spiritual practice. Instruments were integral to Greek life. The lyre, associated with Apollo, was central to education. Boys, especially from aristocratic families, learned to play it as part of their schooling. The kithara, a larger and more complex version of the lyre, was used in professional settings and at religious festivals. Then came the olos, a double-reed wind instrument with a sharp, piercing sound often featured in dramas, rituals, and even military contexts. Music was also tightly linked to drama. In Greek tragedies, choruses didn't merely recite, they sang. Entire plays were composed in lyrical meters, turning dialogue into melodic sequences of fate. Each step of Oedipus, each cry of Medea, was underscored by rhythm and tone. But behind the drama was theory. Pythagoras, best known for his geometric theorem, also discovered that harmonious sounds came from simple ratios like 2-1 or 3-2. This led to the concept of the music of the spheres, the idea that celestial bodies moved in perfect harmony, producing music too divine for human ears. Plato and Aristotle expanded on this foundation. Plato believed music shaped the soul, and by extension society. A culture's moral health, he argued, could be judged by its music. Some musical modes uplifted, others corrupted. In this view, music wasn't just emotional, it was formative. To play an instrument was to touch the structure of reality. To sing was to engage in divine order. Understanding music meant understanding the soul. When Rome expanded its empire, it adopted not just territories, but also the music of conquered cultures. From Etruscan trumpets to Greek lyres, Roman music became a blend of styles unified under Roman rule. But unlike the Greeks, who often examined music's moral dimensions, the Romans were more concerned with its function and its volume. Music was omnipresent in Roman life, in temples, military camps, theaters, banquets, and gladiator arenas. It served to instruct, entertain, and display power. The cornu, a large curved brass horn, became iconic in the Roman military. It delivered commands and alerts clearly across the battlefield. Though not melodious, it was crucial for survival. In civilian life, music became more elaborate. The tibia, Rome's version of the aulos, featured in sacrifices and public ceremonies. The hydraulis, an early water-powered organ, used air and water pressure to create sound. Found at both religious rites and blood sport games, it was dramatic and loud, perfect for Rome's love of spectacle. At feasts, music played a more seductive role. Women and enslaved performers entertained with string instruments like the cithara and lute, while dancers moved to subtle rhythms. In aristocratic homes, music was a status symbol, an imported art meant to impress and show sophistication. Yet music also had sacred value. Certain religious rituals called for Carmen, sacred chants believed to influence divine will or ward off evil. Some of these evolved into structured hymns, merging spoken prayer with melody. Rome wasn't known for musical innovation, but it excelled at adaptation. It absorbed musical traditions, just as it did gods, reworking and repurposing them. Roman roads carried not only armies, but also songs, instruments, and musical customs. Wherever the legions marched, the sounds of empire followed. In Rome, music fulfilled many roles: glory, order, entertainment, and devotion. It was the heartbeat of empire, echoing through marble temples and over bloodied sand. Before Vedic chants filled Indian temples, a subtler musical culture thrived in the Indus Valley, one of the world's earliest urban civilizations. Though much remains unknown, the fragments that survive suggest a people finely attuned to rhythm, ritual, and sound. Unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia, the Indus left no deciphered musical texts. But the evidence, musical instruments, figurines, and city acoustics, tells its own story. Archaeologists have unearthed cylindrical drums, shell trumpets, and flutes made from bird bones and terracotta. Some of these flutes had perfectly placed finger holes, indicating an advanced grasp of pitch and tone. Most telling are the figurines of dancers found at sites like Mohenjo-daro, bodies captured mid-step, hair braided, torsos swaying. Where there is dance, there is rhythm. Where there is rhythm, there is music. These figures point to a lively, rhythmic culture, one where drums and dance expressed communal emotion. As the Vedic age dawned and Sanskrit texts began to take form, the subcontinent's musical tradition became far more intricate. But its foundation had already been laid, seeded by those silent ceramic flutes of the Indus. Over time, Indian music became deeply entwined with spiritual practice. The Vedas, Hinduism's sacred texts, were chanted in structured melodic patterns known as sama. These were not songs in the usual sense, but precise sound formulas intended to preserve cosmic balance. By the time the Natya Shastra, an ancient treatise on drama and dance, was compiled, Indian music had already become a spiritual science. And around 200 BC, Indian music was already organized into ragas, melodic frameworks, and talas, the rhythmic cycles. Instruments such as the veena, an early string instrument, and the mridangam, a double-headed drum, became central to both religious rituals and court performances. Yet as musical theory grew more complex, the heart of Indian music remained unchanged. It was devotion in sound, vibration as connection, music as a bridge between the physical and the spiritual, between silence and resonance, between the human and the divine. In the Indus Valley, music wasn't documented with ink. It lived through breath, rhythm, and timelessness. In ancient China, music was never merely sound. It embodied the universe's structure made audible. Deeply influenced by Confucian and Taoist thought, early Chinese music aimed to reflect the harmony between heaven, earth, and humanity. Music was not just a form of entertainment, but a means of aligning oneself with the natural and ethical order. Archaeological discoveries like stone chimes, bianking, and bone flutes from the Neolithic period reveal instruments meticulously tuned, not only for aesthetics, but to represent cosmic balance. Each tone corresponded to elements like wood, fire, earth, metal, and water, as well as to the seasons and cardinal directions. A melody was more than a tune. It was philosophy in sound. By the Zhou dynasty, 1046–256 BCE, music had become integral to governance and moral instruction. Confucius himself stated, "To educate someone, start with poetry, strengthen with ritual, and perfect with music." He believed music could shape the soul and reflect the moral state of a nation. Dissonant or chaotic music suggested social disorder, while soft, harmonious tones indicated peace and balance. Court musicians used instruments such as the guqin, a seven-stringed zither valued for its reflective tones, associated with scholars and contemplation rather than entertainment. Its quiet notes invited introspection, not applause. Larger ceremonial ensembles featured instruments like the sheng, a mouth-blown reed instrument, along with drums and bronze bells, especially in rituals honoring ancestors. Yayue, or elegant music, was the formal genre for state and spiritual ceremonies, where every sound had ritual significance and was regulated to prevent imbalance. Chinese music theory introduced distinctive scales, such as the pentatonic scale, using 5 notes per octave. This gave Chinese melodies their flowing, meditative quality, resembling the elements of water and wind. In ancient China, to hear music was to witness cosmic order. To play it well was to live in tune with the world. Each note was a lesson, each silence a reflection. In ancient Hebrew tradition, music served as a link between heaven and earth, sorrow and celebration, humanity and the divine covenant. It wasn't simply for enjoyment, it was sacred. Every instrument, every voice was part of an offering. From the earliest passages in the Hebrew Bible, music is central. In Genesis, Jubal is named the father of all who play the lyre and pipe, indicating that from the beginning, music was considered a divine human gift. In Exodus, after the parting of the Red Sea, Miriam leads the women in dance and song, a sacred memory of deliverance. By King David's time, music was a key element of spiritual life. David, both warrior and musician, was said to soothe Saul's troubled spirit with his harp. Under his leadership, music became central to temple rituals. He appointed Levitical musicians whose responsibilities included performing, preserving sacred songs, and maintaining spiritual harmony through sound. The Psalms, many attributed to David, are among the most enduring poetic hymnals in human history. These texts were meant to be sung or chanted, often with lyres, harps, cymbals, and trumpets. Some psalms mourn, others celebrate, but all are expressions of the soul reaching toward the divine. The first temple, built by Solomon, institutionalized music further. Musicians had designated roles, and instruments were standardized. Trumpets marked offerings, cymbals signaled sacred transitions, music framed the religious calendar, enriched festivals, and added depth to every rite. Even after the temple's destruction, music remained a vital thread of cultural memory. In Babylonian exile, the Hebrews still sang of Zion, though with trembling voices. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat and wept. How can we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? Yet they sang. Hebrew music endured, not through architecture but through memory. It was music of survival, of covenant, of prayer whispered across centuries. As the ancient world gradually transitioned into classical antiquity and the medieval era, the music of these early civilizations didn't disappear. It evolved. Instruments were redesigned, tonal systems modified, and traditions absorbed into new cultural and religious frameworks. But the spirit of the music endured. The sound of a Mesopotamian lyre, the resonance of an Egyptian sistrum, or the hush between plucks on a Chinese guqin, these weren't lost. They were carried forward in memory and practice. In a sense, ancient music is a language we no longer fluently speak, but instinctively understand. We can't truly hear how a Babylonian hymn sounded, only reconstruct it from clay tablets, fragments of notation, and historical descriptions. But we can still feel its purpose, its yearning to unite body and soul, time and eternity. Even when full compositions are gone, music remains etched in stone, painted on walls. Priestesses dancing in Minoan frescoes, harpists sculpted in Assyrian. Reliefs, Roman mosaics depicting cithara players at banquets. These images, though still, pulse with rhythm. They remind us that ancient music was never background. It was the core of ritual, protest, celebration, and healing. Astonishingly, some of it still survives. In India, the raga system continues to follow structures derived from Vedic chants. In China, guqin players perform pieces that echo melodies once heard in Confucian temples. In Jewish synagogues, psalms are still sung with traditional tunes passed down for millennia. These aren't replicas, they're living traditions. Ancient music wasn't captured on vinyl or streamed online. It was preserved through people, practices, and purpose. It was passed down not through technology, but through lived experience. We may never perfectly recreate the sound of an Inca ceremony or a hymn sung in an ancient court, but when someone beats a drum, sings a spontaneous phrase, or plays a melody that stirs the heart, we glimpse the ancient. Civilizations may have fallen and empires faded, but their music remains, not only in the pages of history but within us.